I can really relate to that too. I mean, even though I grew up in the Latino church and also in the Chinese American church, same thing. I mean, most of the books we read were just translations, um, or reiterations of white American, or European, thinkers. And there was some good stuff there, and I'm grateful. But we were not aware, like you said. I mean, I wasn't even aware, even like 10 years ago, I wasn't aware that there was this 500-year Christian justice tradition in Latin America and among US Latinos that I call the brown church. Like that we've been reading the Bible and theologizing about justice and race and every other topic, salvation, for 500 years.
Hmm.
um, Justice is kind of a trendier thing now over the last 5, 10 years in Christian circles in the US. So it was amazing for me to discover for myself that, oh my gosh, you know, since the 1500s, we as Latin Americans, Latinos, we've been thinking about this stuff too. And so in the book, I talk about like how the Brown Church was born actually in 1511.
Wow.
1511, when there was again, I'm defining Brown Church as the Latin American Christian justice tradition. In 1511, in what is now like the Dominican Republic and Haiti and the Caribbean, there was a Dominican priest by the name of Montesinos. And also, it's important to note 1511, of course, is 6 years before Luther nailed his famous thesis. So it's before the
Mm.
Protestant Catholic divide. But in 1511, this Dominican friar gets up on the Sunday before Christmas. So actually, kind of 119 years ago. I'm sorry, 519 years ago. Sorry. And he preaches to this audience of Spanish elites in the islands there. And he says, listen very carefully. The words I'm about to preach will be the strangest you ever heard. He says, I am the voice of one crying out in the wilderness. And then he says, you Spaniards, God gave you the opportunity to share about Jesus in love to these hundreds of thousands of natives that then lived in what we call the Caribbean, the so-called West Indies. But he said, God gave you the opportunity to share about Jesus with in love, and instead you've enslaved them and you're killing them, and this is so horrendous. And if you don't repent, God's going to send you to hell. He preached that in
Wow.
1511. 1511, the
Wow.
first social justice sermon. And then the Spaniards, just like today, you know how
Yeah.
if a pastor gets up and preaches a justice sermon, he gets all these
Right.
emails and people get really mad.
Right. Right.
Spaniards, the Spanish elites did the same thing, got all mad at him. He came back the next Sunday and preached part two. And that's when the Brown Church was born.
Wow. Brilliant. Oh, I love that. And I love that also that he was addressing like the slavery issue that he was seeing.
Yes. hmm It's just horrible. I mean, and unfortunately, kind of his prophetic kind of words were not really heeded. And within probably 50 years after that, I mean, there was basically no indigenous population left in the
Hmm.
Caribbean. Yeah, it was so horrible.
I had no idea that it went back to 1511. That's amazing. Yeah, before even Luther. And to have that preached, very much a social justice sermon being preached so early on, and sad that and tragic that, like you said, it wasn't heeded, and the abuse that happened after that. That's amazing. And then again, this is like the history that I didn't know. So you really started diving into this about 10 years ago.
Even less, to be
Oh,
honest.
okay, yeah,
Maybe even like 7 years ago, I just started to kind of read into like, and this is where like I go to an amazing brown church called La Fuente Ministries in Pasadena, and my pastor Marcos Canales, he's the one that introduced me to this. So he, having studied at Fuller Centro Latino, he introduced me to the fields of Latino theology and Latin American liberation theology and some other types of fields, which I didn't even know existed. Of course, I had heard about liberation theology, but didn't know much about it. But he introduced me to the fact that, well, yes, there is liberation theology in Latin America, and that's very valuable. There's a Protestant expression of, that talks about similar justice issues called Misión Integral. And then there's U.S. Latina theology born in the U.S. And he introduced me to that world. I just started to read those books he recommended, and found out, oh my gosh, there's this history that's out there. I'm not the first person to talk about it, but it's for the most part, it's scattered. It's like you only read about it if you're a very specialized Latino theology scholar at a place like Fuller. But even if you're maybe if you're a seminary student at Fuller, you might never hear about this. So it's like it's been sort. It's like kind of this historical sort of experience that very few people know about. And there have been amazing scholars like Justo Gonzalez and others, many others, right, who have been writing about this stuff, for decades. But I guess if there's a contribution of the Brown Church was that I guess I could write a book. I had the privilege of writing a book that would pull it all together.
Yeah.
And that would pull it all together with a framework that is attractive to some people, right? The framework of the Brown Church and Brown theology and so forth.
Hey, thank you so much for checking out this video clip from the Delgado podcast. To get more videos like this, simply subscribe here on YouTube. You can also download the full episode of each show on iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, or your favorite podcast player. Take care.